Reid, in terms of implementing ethical programs in the organization, what works best? Is it bottom-up or top-down approach? And what do you see?
It's not going to work if you don't have senior leadership behind it. That's totally crucial. So you need senior leadership. One reason that you need it is to have the right kind of oversight. And another reason you need it is to get the right kind of organizational buy-in. And relatedly, you need the right kinds of financial incentives, or at least you need the absence of financial disincentives. So if you don't have those kinds of things in place, you're just not going to get the right kind of buy-in. There's other things that you need for buy-in, like engineers who don't just regard ethics as squishy, subjective, mushy stuff that doesn't really matter for people who are intellectually serious. So you've got to get rid of that. But it's great for the bottom-up stuff is good for getting senior leaders to move on it. But if you don't get the senior leaders to push for it, to endorse it, then you're not going to go anywhere.
Great. I want to follow up with one more question. Last time when we spoke, you talked about the content and the structure.
Oh yeah, sure.
Right? Can you share that thought process with the audience, please?
Yeah. So a lot of people talk about AI ethics, and then they sort of it's just a big jumble of stuff, right? So you look at your average framework or something, framework, word that I really don't like very much, but let's get an AI ethics framework, and then it's just a bunch of stuff. You just throw some words at it. Fairness, fairness, privacy, explainability, accountability, transparency, and sort of just a big jumble. So one way that I like people to think about these things is to distinguish between the structure of something like an AI ethics program or framework, whatever you like, and the content. So the structure is just going to be what you put in place in order to answer the question, how do you systematically and exhaustively identify ethical risks of AI? That is to say, throughout development, testing, deployment, and so on. So what are the role-specific responsibilities of, say, data collectors, of engineers, of product owners? When they smell ethical smoke, what's the alarm that they can pull? Who does it go to? Does it go to a deliberative body? How do you determine who's on that deliberative body? What's their jurisdiction or powers? So on and so forth. So that's all structure. That answers the question, how do you do it? How do you vet for ethical risks? And the content question is, what are the ethical risks you're looking to avoid? So we don't want to invade people's privacy. We don't want to discriminate. We want explainable outputs. Maybe there's lots to say about explainability, about whether that's really an ethical issue, as opposed to a sort of whether it's an ethical value or it's an instrumental value to achieve other values that we care about. This sort of gets to what John was talking about. It's a tool by which we can get more predictability, which is good, so that we can make it so that we can predict whether it's going to discriminate, blah, blah, blah. I don't think it's just that. Anyway, so the content answers the question. So while the structure asks the question, the structure of your AI program answers the question, what or how are you vetting for ethical risks? The content issue is, what are the ethical risks that you're looking to identify and mitigate? And you can bring this distinction into relief by imagining a perfect structure instantiated by the KKK. Right, so the KKK they say, look, we really care about AI ethics. We want to have a really good structure. Let's make sure that we really want to make sure that we have biased data sets. We really want to make sure that we're ensuring that they're biased in a way that favors the white race. And, we have an ethics committee to make sure that balanced data sets don't get through, et cetera. And they're really good at it, right? So you could have a phenomenal governance structure, but the content is, if you like, all wrong. And so I think that what people should be thinking about when they think about these things is, let's think about structure, let's think about content, and then let's think about what constitutes a comprehensive structure and what constitutes comprehensive analysis or investigation of the ethical risks.
There you go. That's a great explanation.
I really, I really like the way you frame that, Reid. Because I think a lot of buzzwords are thrown at this, but I think something you said, which really resonated with me, is that I'm a real nerd. Went through all sorts of engineering, undergraduate, graduate school, and I think ethics was always considered to be one of those nice to have. But I think that what it really came down to me is sort of teaching a certain humility that that engineering can often be about certainty, establishing certainty. And I think with ethics, you have to be able to sort of back off of it and say, how could this technology be misused? I do believe that there are people who would intentionally, put ethical problems into a system. I think the example you gave is pretty interesting. But I think oftentimes, if you look at things like Social Dilemma, the movie, it's kind of unintended and it's sort of a slippery slope. And if you teach the engineers to be always certain and understand their purpose, they become defensive. I think that it's really interesting to see engineering programs around the world start to try to teach ethics. And I think part of it is sort of recognizing that your best intents may still have an unintended consequence. So I think it's really interesting, this sort of bottoms up. It's really great that there are people like you who would sort of inform what the ethics, practical ethics, how do you actually instill ethics into machines in something more than a buzzword way? Because I think that you have to do it tops down, as you said, because you need the support. But bottoms up is, I think, that the technical decisions that may end up being misused or have unintended consequences are created by hundreds of thousands of engineers, hopefully without meaning to be. And I think the more that we can start addressing it there and start having meaningful conversations like you just did, the better off we'll be.
And I think there's sort of two issues that you're drawing attention to, or that we're drawing attention to, which is one, it's how do you get the engineers to buy into the issue in the first place? And that's about why should we take this stuff seriously? And then the second is, if they do take it seriously, what do we need to teach them? And are they the right people to teach? I'm not totally convinced. So what I mean is, the first thing which is to have to do with getting them to understand it as a real issue. Some of them automatically get it, right? Some of them are probably a lot like you, where you're doing cool things. I think this is sort of characteristic of some significant subset of the tech industry, which is why we're having this conversation, which is, we just wanted to build cool stuff. Like, we're nerds who want to build cool things. We didn't realize we were going to do all this harm. That's bad. We should stop that. We need to figure out how to stop that. That's a significant subset, but it's not. I don't think it's the sort of overwhelming majority of technologists. The others, I think, they sort of know that stuff exists. They think it's overhyped. Some of them, they think it's just political correctness. And anyway, they're doing much harder intellectually puzzling stuff. They don't want to figure out that puzzle. And so for them, the thing to do, at least my technique, is to show them how much they don't know about ethics, that it's not squishy, feely, touchy stuff, that ethicists do more than just emote. And so you use the word humility, John, and I think it's really important. So frankly, what I try to do is I try to intellectually humble them within a domain, right? So they can intellectually humble me, coding, data analysis, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know anything of that. I can't do that stuff. But when it comes to talking about ethics, I can show that they don't know, they're not the expert in the room. And that ethics can be intellectually demanding and hard, and they're really hard puzzles to solve. And that's how you can get a bunch of the engineers on board, because then they realize, there's a puzzle here. Oh, that's interesting. And before they thought it was just mushy stuff. The second thing, though, let's say we get them on board. Now, okay, we better teach the engineers ethics so that we can get at least not bad outcomes. And while I think that's part of the solution, it can't be the whole of it, for the simple reason that you can't teach me engineering in a semester or two, and I can't teach you, you can't teach me how to be a great engineer in a couple of semesters, and I can't teach you how to be a great ethicist in a couple of semesters. These things take time. So getting them educated is great, but part of that education is understanding that it's good to have other kinds of experts in the room.
Oh, sure. Totally agree.